Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. Up today we're painting a Celestial Warbringers Sequitur. As you can see here, the miniature is primed in Mechanica Standard Grey. We're going to move on to the first base coat, which is Screamer Pink, applied to all the armour except the shoulder pads. Okay, here you can see the Screamer Pink finished. One thin coat was enough to cover. So next up we move on to Zandri Dust, which is painted over some of the robes and his little scroll that he has hanging off his waist. It took 2 thin coats of Zandri Dust to get a flat cover. Don't forget his little piece at the back. So next up we move on to a base coat of Kantor blue over the remaining robes. Here you can see the completed Kantor blue on their robes. These guys really do like their robes. So next up we're going to move on to Abaddon black, which we're going to use on the shaft of the weapon and any exposed bits of the undersuit and as belt as well. Here you can see the Abaddon black on the weapon handle, the belt and any exposed under armour pieces. This guy's only got one on his leg as the robes cover up most of the other ones. So next up we take some Rhinox hide. I'm going to be applying these to the leather protectors that he has on his arms. You could paint these the same colour as the armour if you wanted to cut down on the number of paints you're using and speed it up. Next up we're going to take some Retributor armour. It's going to be applied to the trim on the shoulder pads. Try not to go inside the shoulder pads here, as we're going to be putting down a lighter colour later. We're going to do some decorative pieces on the head and the lower piece, and also his little emblem in there, which I'll do off camera because it's a bit small. Next up we move on to the second last of the base coats, and that's Leadbelcher, which we're going to be applying to the head of the weapon and his little chain that he has hanging from his waist. Next up is the final base coat, which is to apply Wraithbone to the flat surfaces of the armour. You're definitely going to need 2 thin coats here. You really want to avoid any texture build-up on such flat predominant areas. Here you can see the Wraithbone. It doesn't need to be perfectly flat, as a final wash or a final coat, of white scar is going to be going over it anyway. So avoiding texture is probably more important than getting an absolutely perfect finish. Now that the base coats are done, we're going to move on to the shades. I'm going to be using 3 shades. The first up is going to be Druchii Violet over all the armour panels. Normally I'd apply a shade with the medium shade brush, but as I need a bit more control with this miniature, we're going to stick with a medium layer brush. Principles are the same. Even coverage, avoid any excessive pooling, work it into the details. While the Druchii Violet is drying, we're going to go in with a shade of Seraphim sepia over everything that we've already painted in Zandri Dust. So his robes and the scroll hanging from his waist. Just make sure you work it into all the folds in the fabric. Don't forget the little piece on his back. The next shade is Nuln Oil, which is applied over the weapon head and the Retributor armour sections. Normally you wouldn't put Nuln Oil over the Retributor armour, but I think 4 shades on one mini is a bit excessive. So for convenience we're going to stick with the Nuln Oil. Here we have switched to the medium shade brush to apply the Nuln oil to the large pieces of the blue fabric. Just work it into the folds, prevent any excessive build up. Now while all those three shades are drying, we're going to take our white scar and we're going to apply it on the shoulder pad. This is being tinged down with a touch of water as well. Here you can see the white scar. It's been applied in 2 thin coats. There's a small bit of texture build up, unfortunately, but practice makes perfect. Now it's time for some highlights, and for this I've swapped over to my small layer brush. We're taking some pink horror, just control the amount of paint on the brush, and we're going to use it to edge highlight the armour sections. Here we continue with our edge highlight with Alaitoc blue. We also apply it to any raised areas in the fabric. The Alaitoc blue does look a bit bright when it goes on, but as it dries it tones down a bit and doesn't look as high contrast as it does when it's wet. Here you can see the edge highlights on the raised areas and around the rim of this cloak. Here we move on to the final step, which is a dry brush of Screaming Skull over all the Zandri dust areas. You can also apply a light dry brush of this to the black on his weapon handle just to bring out some of the extra detail.